So this video is titled Keep Right On to the End of the Road. It's an introduction to dependent arising or emptiness for fans of Birmingham City Football Club and others. And it's inspired by an exchange I had these last few days with my old friend Kevin Grant. We had an exchange over Facebook, whose origins lay like 3 years ago when Kevin's son George had his prognosis that the brain tumour George was suffering from was terminal. And at that time, Kev used a metaphor of a big turd that couldn't be polished, and the metaphor stuck in my mind. And in the years since then, I've been doing a bit of gardening in France, and especially become interested in no-dig gardening, where you use compost to both feed the soil and protect the soil from weeds. So you use the compost as a kind of mulch. So it's impressed me how incredibly useful horse muck can be, because I've got the horse and the donkey in the field of my neighbour over there. So I've been barrowing that to the compost heap and then seeing it turn to compost, and realising how useful that's been for like growing strawberries. And also studying the teaching of emptiness, which is more profound than saying that horse muck and strawberries are dependent on each other. Because for things to be dependent on each other, they have to exist separately. The teaching of emptiness is more radical than that. It says that horse manure and strawberries do not exist independently. There's no such thing as a strawberry as a thing unto itself. The strawberry is empty of its own existence, but is full of the efforts of the horses, the horse and the donkey, to digest the straw and produce horse manure. So in emphasising to Kev the value of shit, Kev came back to me on Facebook yesterday by saying a patient of mine has been going through all sorts of shit. He has meditated and is interested in emptiness, etc. He's struggling with bouts of intense alcohol and drug abuse. He may be interested in your YouTube videos. Do you have an address or reference to point him to? So of course that made me think, well, I could point him to the verses on the dedicatory verses, where Nagarjuna says the Buddha taught dependent arising, the cessation of spinning things into self-existence, happiness. That's what the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught happiness, which is synonymous with dependent arising or emptiness. But it's kind of Occam's razor. You know, it's obvious from the number of views my videos are getting that they're not really a mass market product. They're really pitched at people who are interested in Sanskrit study. So I thought, right, well, I haven't got a video that I can point Kev's patient to that explains dependent arising, or explains the essence of the Buddha's teaching of dependent arising and happiness. So I thought, right, well, Kev's own motto is keep right on, KRO for short, and that. So when we were in our teenage years, Kevin and I were partners in crime in various activities, including drinking homebrew beer while playing darts, and we both played rugby together. We went to different schools, but sometimes we played together. And then I tagged along with Kev to his Venture Scout group, so he sometimes went hiking in North Wales and that kind of thing, or canoeing, those kind of activities in the Venture Scouts. But mainly we used to go and watch Birmingham City play at St Andrews and away. Kev's older brother used to drive us everywhere in his Morris Minor van. So he would sing, "Keep right on to the end of the road." This is the blues fans' song. "Keep right on to the end of the road. Keep right on to the end. Though the way be long, let your heart beat strong. Keep right on to the end. Though you're tired and weary, still journey on, till you come to your happy abode, where all the love you've been dreaming of will be there at the end of the road." So if we take that as an expression on a deeper level of what the Buddha taught, which it can be understood like that, kind of an archetypal expression of of the direction we're all struggling to go in, then the end of the road is the cessation of suffering. And the important thing that I've been trying to clarify for self and others by studying Nagarjuna's teaching is that suffering is dependently arisen. So there's no such thing as suffering as a separately existing thing that we can destroy. If we try to make a target of something and destroy it as such, that's what the Buddha called prapancha, spinning things into self-existence. So we can't defeat suffering in that way. And in fact, when we turn to alcohol and drugs as like anesthetics, that's what we're trying to do ineffectively. We're trying to block out the suffering generally when they become addictive. We're trying to block out the suffering as if it could be blocked out. Whereas what the Buddha taught was deepen our understanding of how suffering is arisen, not from separate self-existing causes. You know, for example, it's easy to sort of trace things back to traumas that we suffered in childhood or along the way. But again, those weren't specific separate events, you know, so the point is to take a see in the bigger picture. And a good method to kind of getting the big picture is to look at a picture that has been designed for that purpose. Like so, for example, I recommend if you Google Wheel of Life, Bhava Chakra, the Wheel of Life or Wheel of Becoming, BBC, that'll take you to, I've got it here, a page called Wheel of Life Overview. The Bhava Chakra, the Wheel of Life or Wheel of Becoming, is a mandala, a complex picture representing the Buddhist view of the universe. Okay, so what you see in this beautiful, mainly blue mandala is Mara, the god of death, the destroyer. He's holding the wheel of becoming. And outside that, there's the Buddha sitting in full lotus, pointing to the moon. And the moon is a symbol of the end of the road. The moon is a symbol of nirvana, which means going out of a fire. So the ending of the fire of suffering. And so what the Mara's holding, that wheel of life, is the shitstorm of samsara. So if we're thinking in terms of horse manure and strawberries, the horse manure being the bad stuff, as we generally conceive it, and the strawberries being the good stuff, then the most important thing that Nagarjuna clarifies is that the bad stuff and the good stuff are in no sense separate from each other. So this is the point I was trying to make to Kev, you know, that his metaphor of the big unpolishable turd is a very good one in that sense, because the point is to turn the shit into compost, which is the best thing you can possibly have if you want to grow strawberries. So the BBC explanation continues, the wheel is divided into 5 or 6 realms or states into which a soul can be reborn. So that there are 5 or 6 because sometimes the realm of gods is split into 2, which is devas, gods, and asuras, like anti-gods. The gods are floating about in heaven, and the anti-gods have got a bow and arrow shooting at the gods. So those are 2 realms. Then you've got the realm of hungry ghosts. If you're talking about all the love you've been dreaming of, the hungry ghosts are relevant in the sense that they want to be nourished. They've got big bellies, but they've got very thin necks, so that they can't receive that nourishment. So that's one state of suffering. And then you've got hell, beings in hell, which anybody who's ever been a big drinker will have experienced the morning after, suffering from bad hangovers. And then you've got the world of animals, and then the world of human beings. So those are the 5 or 6 realms in the cycle of samsara. Right in the centre of the mandala, you've got a pig, a cock, and a snake, representing the 3 root afflictions, the bad emotional states. So the pig represents ignorance, the rooster represents lust or greed, and the snake represents ill will, hatred. And then around the rim of the wheel of becoming, you've got 12 stages in the cycle of the dependent arising of suffering. So this is the important thing again to understand. Each one of those 12 does not exist as a separate stage, but Nagarjuna uses the metaphor of like a sparkler on bonfire night. If you whiz it round, it's like that. There isn't a separate point of light. It's one interconnected cycle. So the first one of the 12 is ignorance, represented by a blind man. And from ignorance, there are samskaras. Now this is a really important one to understand. On the BBC website, samskaras are translated as willed actions. And there's some merit in translating like that, because the Buddha did emphasize the volitional aspect of samskaras. But I prefer to translate samskaras as doings. So nirvana is asamskrita, non-doing. And those words samskrita and samskara are the same, from the same root, they're the same word. So in Chinese, wu wei, or in Japanese, mui, means non-doing. And this took me a lot of years to start to get to grips with this, because in Japan, Zen meditation is taught in a very doing way. Non-doing means you don't deliberately try to get it right. So doing, samskaras are born of ignorance. And so how do we stop the doing? Well, we have to stop the ignorance. But then again, the ignorance is related to, for example, attachment. So it's not a question of there being 12 separate things. It's all one problem. So the first one is ignorance, then the second is doings, samskaras. Then the third link in the chain is divided consciousness. So from our deluded, ignorant doings, our consciousness becomes divided. And from that, the fourth link, psychophysicality. We experience ourselves as a separate body and mind instead of something whole. So again, if you go back to keep right on to the end of the road, where all the love you've been dreaming of, that is a condition of wholeness. I mean, if you're not psychophysical, if you think of yourself as a separate body and mind, you might have the good fortune, so you've thought and felt, to really fall in love with the girl of your dreams. But if you're not integrated, you won't experience it as a whole. So the most fortunate thing actually is not to meet the object of your love on the outside. The most fortunate thing is somehow to become integrated within yourself and with your work, become one with your work, with some task. And that's how you'll find all the love you've been dreaming of. Not by hitting some target out there, but by experiencing no barriers between self and others. And that depends on how you act. Whether you act in a doing way, like this, I'm demonstrating doing now, doing upright posture, or whether you explore the more difficult option of non-doing, which is not me doing it, but more thy will be done. So it has a more spiritual kind of connotation of letting happen what I can't do. So again, starting first is ignorance, then doings. Out of doings comes divided consciousness. Out of divided consciousness comes psychophysicality. Then from psychophysicality, there are 6 senses. So further division. We experience ourselves not only as a divided body and mind, but as seeing and hearing and smelling all separately. And so then the 6th link is called contact. So contact is between the object of your sensory perception and one of the 6 senses. Then contact gives rise to feeling. That's represented on the wheel of life by an arrow through the eye. So feeling and pain are the same word in Sanskrit, Vedana. And then feeling gives rise to thirsting or craving. So that's something that's very familiar to anybody who struggle with alcohol and drugs. The sense of even though the good feeling associated with drinking or drugs was like an arrow through the eye, one still craves it, one still has the thirst. And then from thirsting, the next stage is attaching or clinging. And there are 4 kinds of attachment. Attachment to views, attachment to desires, attachment to virtue and vows of practice. So even though those are generally thought of as very good things in Buddhism, to be virtuous and to stick to vows of practice, insofar as we attach to them, they're also a cause of suffering. So this link is showing that attachment, clinging, is a cause of suffering. And then the 4th kind of attachment is attachment to self-narratives, one's own story. And then that's number 9. So number 10 is bhava, which means becoming, as in bhava chakra. So from what we attach to, we become one thing after another. And then becoming gives rise to birth, which can mean, you can take it literally to mean being born in a new incarnation, or like sometimes we talk, in a past life I was a rugby player, in a past life I was a student. So being born in a new sphere. You can think of being born in a new realm, in the shitstorm of samsara, going from hell to animals to human beings to a godlike state, and so on. And then finally, the sufferings of aging and death. So the point of studying those, that's the dependent arising of suffering. And the end of the road is that if we stop, for example, attachment or stop doing, we're stopping the cycle of the dependent arising of suffering. So if I put that into my own, what it actually means, in practice, I'll go back to the thing of eating strawberries. Last year I grew quite a lot of strawberries and would have them in the morning with porridge and cream. And that was a happiness greater than just having bought strawberries down the supermarket. First of all, they tasted better, but it's because I worked to facilitate their growth, put it that way. Well, it wasn't me that grew the strawberries. Growing strawberries is not a thing that I can do. Again, it's a effort of non-doing. So what I can do is fork up the compost from my neighbour's horse and donkey, put it on the compost heap. But then the real growth of the strawberries is a non-doing thing. But I can experience that, and especially when I eat it, as I eat the strawberries, that's something very happy. So that's a metaphor for cultivating understanding of non-doing. Growing and eating strawberries is a metaphor for cultivating understanding of non-doing. That is nirvana. The point I wanted to make then is that for someone who's not really interested in studying Sanskrit and going deeply into the teachings of Nagarjuna, the essential gist of it is you are experiencing the shitstorm of samsara. So what does it mean that the Buddha's pointing to nirvana? The most important thing that Nagarjuna teaches is that what's symbolised by the moon, nirvana, and the shitstorm of samsara don't exist separately from each other. Nagarjuna says in MMK, there is no dividing line between samsara and nirvana. Whatever is the border, the edge of samsara is the edge of nirvana. Whatever is the edge of nirvana is the edge of samsara. And for me, there's no better way there's no better metaphor for that than a relationship between horse muck and strawberries. So that's a practice I would recommend anybody. Start composting and use that compost to grow something edible.